Okay, hello miracles. Welcome to your second lesson, but like your third day of class. Technically it's your fourth. You know what? We're all over the place. We're literally so all over the place right now, but you know what? It's fine. Either way, welcome back to another day of class. Actually, before we get into anything, can we just appreciate this cute little rainbow plant that I have? It's so cute. If you're just listening to this, I'm sorry, but all I'll say is that it's the cutest little rainbow crochet plant. The flower is a heart and it's rainbow, and then yeah, the rest is just like green, but it's crocheted and it's so cute. I am obsessed with this and it very much fits, you know, what we're doing or what we're talking about in this episode, so I just had to bring it up. It's so cute. Anyway, that's so off topic, but going back into our lesson, you know what? We're just gonna cut all of this, cut to the chase, essentially. We need to just get straight ahead because let's just say this one's going to be quite a long episode. The slideshow that I made for this is actually 149 slides, which if you guys remember, the Feelagami one was only like 70. Mind you, I did have to format this, or not I had to, but I did format this slideshow a little bit different than the other one, so I wasn't able to put as much information on each slide, so maybe that's why it's longer, but all that's to say we have to go through so much today. So yapping needs to stop. We're just gonna get straight into this episode. So previously on Miraculous University, so essentially right around the time that The Ruler came out, Thomas did an interview with Seriously where he talked about whether or not Marc and Nathaniel were dating. Essentially he confirmed that they were not, which was a shock to all of us. We were like, yes, Marc and Nathaniel's canon, they're finally dating, and then come to find out apparently they weren't. That was hurtful, let me tell you. So Marc and Nathaniel are not dating. What? That is crazy. Okay, let me tell you, when I said that in the Feelagami episode, there were so many comments being like, what? I had no idea. What do you mean they're not dating? Which, like, I feel like was all of our reactions when we first found out that they weren't dating. Yeah, I have a feeling some of the people that are watching this podcast episode specifically had no idea that they weren't dating. So if you didn't know, just dropped a bomb on you. I'm sorry, but they are not dating, okay? Anyway, I got so many comments, like I was saying, on that episode, but just like in general, of people being like, what? They weren't dating, I didn't know that. It was a shock to all of us. Very shocking for me. And honestly, I feel like the reason why it was so shocking to me is because when I first watched the episode, I knew what it was talking about, but I didn't know all the details of it. Now that I know that they're not dating and I've like heavily analyzed this episode, I can obviously see and I can tell that they're not dating. It makes sense. But when I first watched it, it was crazy. Anyway, but yeah, and I think that's kind of why most people are shocked too. Like, they haven't really sat down and like really dissected this, not this episode, but The Ruler. So anyway, yeah, Marc and Nathaniel were so couple coded that episode in The Ruler. You know, all of the physical touch, all of the looks between them, and just like the way that they interacted with each other. Like, seriously, if anyone were to see them, they'd be like, yes, they're dating. And, you know, of course, I've seen a lot of people calling all of that bad writing. I think there was this one comment that was like, dude, the writers are so stupid for this. Like, they don't know how to write a show. Like, it was so obvious they were dating. Did you see the way that Nathaniel, like, glazed, or what's the word? Like, grazed grazed Marc's cheek. Like, obviously they're dating. Anyway, but yeah, I've had so many comments of people being like, that's bad writing, like, of course they were dating, or they should have been dating. Like, essentially they're saying that it was just a really stupid idea to make Marc and Nathaniel a situationship rather than an actual relationship. But is it? Is it bad writing? Well, that is exactly what we are going to be finding out today. So welcome to our second lesson of this podcast. Today is all about Marc and Nathaniel. I'm so excited! Ever since The Ruler came out, I've been wanting to do a really like in-depth video about that episode and just about Marc and Nathaniel in general. And I thought this podcast was like the perfect opportunity to do that. So that is why we are doing this today. I don't know if you guys know this. Well, actually, you probably don't know this. If you know me, you know that I love Adrianette and you know that I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with Feelagami. But what you probably didn't know is that I have been one of the biggest Marc and Nathaniel shippers. Like, Marc and Nathaniel has always been one of my things. They've always been my Roman Empire. So seeing them like kind of quote unquote together in The Ruler was like, Oh my god, I was in heaven. So yeah, that's also another reason why I'm so excited to talk about them, because they're such an obsession of mine. Anyways, so as always, there's a topic of the day and then we have a question for every class period. Obviously, the main topic is Marcanniel, but the question we are going to be answering today is, why aren't Marc and Nathaniel dating? Because like I said, so many people were confused as to why they weren't dating, and a lot of people called it bad writing, so I just really want to do like an in-depth video talking about all of this and just really answering the question, why aren't they dating? So we will be looking at all of the factors in terms of Marcanniel that lead us to the answer to this question, specifically focusing on the episode The Ruler, and we'll also be looking at the evolution of Marcanniel. But first, context, as per usual. So just bringing back a point I made in the Philogamy versus Leukogamy video, Seriously released an article titled Miraculous, Are Marc and Nathaniel a Couple? At one point, the article states this, obviously it's in French, but it roughly translates to this right here, and specifically it says, although they are very close and don't hide their deep feelings that bind them, Marc and Nathaniel are not officially a couple at the time of writing. Could this happen in the next part of the series? If we are to believe Thomas Astruc's recent statements to us, there's a good chance. The article continues stating, as he himself explained, the creator of Miraculous and his team imagine couples who have everything to be together and who seem obvious. We just try to see what seems natural for the characters to do or not to do. So at a certain point, when we have characters who get together and others who don't get together, it's not done by chance, it's just logical, he explained. More to come in the next episode then. So essentially, kind of going back to one of the points that we brought up in the Philogamy video, is that the reason why they aren't dating yet is because it's not logical for them to be dating right now. Like I said, huge thing we brought up in the Philogamy video. Leukogamy isn't together because it's not logical, Philogamy is logical, and that's why they are dating. So obviously, like I said, the reason why Marcanniel is not dating is because it's just not logical. But why is it not logical? Well, let's figure it out, shall we? Also, can I just say, I absolutely love this. I think this is my favorite slide out of all of them. It's so cute. It's so cute. So moving on to part 1 of this podcast, The Ruler. So to start off, we will be looking at the episode The Ruler for 2 main reasons. First of all, this episode gives us the most context as to why they aren't dating yet. And 2, it gives us an idea of Nathaniel's home life and his upbringing, which is very crucial into why they're not dating. So the episode The Ruler is about Marc and Nathaniel creating the 2nd edition of their comic Rainpiercer and Sunheart. The only problem is Nathaniel's mom disapproves of comics. She believes that it's not a proper art form and that his skills should be used for a more honorable art form. Nathaniel spends the episode flip-flopping between deciding to follow his heart and creating a comic and conforming to his mother's wishes. Ultimately though, his mom tells him that he must not do the art for the comic anymore or he won't be allowed to see Marc again. Nathaniel, not wanting to lose his best friend, decides to stop being an illustrator for Marc's comics.
And if you ever disobey me, I'll have no choice but to forbid you from seeing Marc again!
Nath, I know you. Even if you stop, you'll keep drawing comics in your head.
I won't. This way, at least, you and I can still be friends.
But by the end of the episode, Nathaniel's mom reads his comic and sees firsthand just how beautiful it really is. She's very moved by the story, which leads her to understand that there is nothing wrong with using artistic abilities for comics. And you know what? It's a very beautiful story on its own. It teaches kids that you should get to choose what you want to do, and like, what your parent wants isn't really important. They shouldn't determine, you know, what you do with your life, whether it's like who you're friends with, what you want to do for a career, or what you even want to do as a hobby. Because you know what? Parents are dumb. Parents are dumb and mean, and sometimes they just don't let people just be themselves, right? So I really like the episode in that aspect. Kids should always get to choose their own path, and what they want to do is just simply a decision that they should be able to make on their own. You shouldn't, as a parent, determine that. But let's be honest, this episode is not and never was about art or comics. Never, ever, 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 ever. Okay? Everything in this episode was just one big metaphor for homophobia. Also, this episode touches on sexuality, coming out, and the hardships that come along with that. So with that in mind, let's go through this episode again, but with queer-coded lenses on. Also, hold on tight, because this is gonna be a really long one. You know, there's not 149 slides for no reason. So the first part of the episode opens up showing the contrast between Nathaniel's and Marc's parents. Also gives us context on the comic, right? Because prior to this point, we never knew anything about Rainpiercer Snowpiercer and Sunheart, so we were able to get a little bit more background and context for, what would be going on in this episode. So yeah, the first bit is of, Nathaniel showing the first edition of the comic to his dad, and his dad seems more open and accepting, but is still against any queer representation, or seemingly.
No, it lacks sentiment. There.
But the relationship between Rainpiercer and Sunheart is pretty deep, isn't it?
No, I'm talking about real sentiment. For example, in the next issue, the two knights could both fall in love with deep darkness.
But she's the villain, Dad.
Sure, but this way, they'd fight each other so she can choose the bravest one of them.
Now, before we kind of move on to what's going on in this clip, I just wanted to give a little side note that it is possible that he doesn't actually believe this. What he's saying is not really what he means. He could have only said that because he just wanted to, go along with what his wife thinks and wife believes, just as a way to, please her. That could also be why he's, constantly, glancing over at her, because he's like, look at me. I'm saying what you would say. I'm doing what you would want me to do. Are you proud of me? Anyway, based on this clip, he likes the story and is very encouraging of Nathaniel, but believes that it needs more sentiment, which sentiment is just an implication of a love story. Nathaniel hints at Reinhardt and Snowpiercer being in a relationship, or them being the sentiment, and his dad replies saying that they should make the two boys fall in love with a girl, and considers a straight relationship real sentiment. He also states this is what people want to see, so he's basically implying that no one wants to read about a queer relationship or queer representation. It has to be straight. Get them gays out of here. His mom, on the other hand, does not read the comic, very obviously disapproves of it, setting the stage for her homophobic behaviors throughout the episode. Now, Marc's parents literally love the daylights out of you. They're very accepting and loving, and they're just very optimistic, right? They love the story. They think it's so beautiful. But anyway, so once again, them showing Marc's parents just kind of shows the contrast between the loving, supportive family that Marc grew up in and lives in, and the unsupporting family that Nathaniel lives in and grew up in. And also, the opening scene kind of helps to give more context on the way that, Nathaniel is acting in this episode and the way Marc is acting in this episode. Now, before we move on to the next section, I need to say that there's nothing that definitively, oh my gosh, proves what I'm going to say is accurate. All of it is my own interpretation of the story based on what I believe fits the story and what they are trying to share. Also, this interpretation would heavily explain why they aren't dating. So, essentially, later on in this slideshow, we're going to be talking about the first 5 minutes a lot. And essentially, what I believe the first 5 minutes is, there's nothing to be yes, this is 1000% what's going on. So I don't know if my interpretation is 1000% correct, but I'm pretty sure my interpretation of the first 5 minutes of the episode is correct. Now, mind you, I'm just talking about the first 5 minutes. Everything after the first 5 minutes is just basically confirmed and true. But it's how I personally perceive the first 5 minutes may not be exactly what they're talking about. I don't know. Y'all will have to see all of the, stuff and the evidence that I give you and can make your own decision, form your own opinion, but I did just want to say that. But anyway, so first off, we need context, as per usual. So many people believed that Marc and Nathaniel were dating in this episode, which also, led to people believing that the comic itself just represented their love and their relationship. So it's his mom disproving of the comic was just her disproving of him being in a relationship with Marc. Obviously, that's not true, and we know that's not true because Thomas has said that Marc and Nathaniel are not and were not dating. So if it doesn't represent their relationship, what does it represent? Well, the comet is actually a representation of Nathaniel's identity and sexuality. That is why we see bicolored lighting as he's doing the art for the comic. So if you see before, he's bathed in yellow lights, but while he's drawing it, this is what the background looks like. Now, mind you, I know that drawing takes a while. So before, it's still light out. After, it's dark out. That's why it's darker, and that's why there's kind of a blue haze. But the way they did it specifically was on purpose. They weren't it's dark out, so let's just flood everything with bicolored lights. No, they did it, specifically. You can make it look dark and night without adding those colors into the frame, okay? Anyway, so here is a bit of a closer look, and once again, if you're just listening to this, I'm so sorry. But if you want to take a look for yourself, just go to the part in the episode where Nathaniel is drawing the art for the comic. You'll be able to see it for yourself. But in the background, obviously, you can see blue And then this, I don't even know exactly what this is, but whatever this is, there's obviously pink there. And then there's lots of purple light within his hair. And honestly, I think they kind of framed this like this on purpose because there's a ton of blue, but there's not as much pink and purple. And I just think why they did this is because obviously he's bi, so they're going to add the bi colors. But Nathaniel is interested in and will end up with a boy with Marc, so I think that's why they framed it that way. Now, just a quick little disclaimer, because I feel like anytime I analyze things, people call me delusional. Me analyzing that scene of Marc, it's not me hyper-analyzing. It's simple media literacy. I'm sorry to tell this to you, but if you see someone analyzing something and you say, that's over-analyzing, they didn't mean that, probably not true. I think you just don't have very good media literacy. I'm sorry, but it needed to be said. Everything that is done in a show is done strategically to portray something. And lighting is one of the most common ways to create symbolism of something. I think lighting is something that you can very easily manipulate, especially if you're in a set or something. And obviously, like with an animated show, everything is drawn, so it's really easy to manipulate those kinds of things and, you know, kind of create a mood and a vibe of like what's going on, or just like a greater sense, I guess, of what's going on and what they're trying to portray and what they're trying to say. So we have Mr. Nick Nelson in the corner here, because Heartstopper is one of my favorite examples of this. Colors are used to portray so many things in the show. Also, Nick is seen bathed in bi-colored lights all of the time, specifically like before he knew he was bi. That's definitely done as symbolism, you know. It's not just like the colors just so happen to be bi-colored. They strategically chose to have the colors like that and the lighting like that. Anyway, so now that we have the context out of the way, here's kind of my interpretation of like the first 5 minutes. So I think the first 5 minutes of the episode are actually just of Nathaniel figuring out his sexuality and like internally accepting his sexuality. That's right. I think the main reason why they aren't dating is because Nathaniel wasn't sure about his sexuality until this episode. And of course, you know, I come with proof, but as per usual, before I can explain anything, we need to backtrack and I need to give a little bit of background information so you guys understand this a lot better. So of course, as I've stated, the ruler gives us a look into Nathaniel's home life, which in return tells us quite a bit about his upbringing. Obviously, in terms of sexuality, it's pretty easy to figure out that he grew up in a gay is wrong household. Figuring out your sexuality and accepting yourself can be hard in general, but it's especially hard when you grow up in an environment that actively looks down on it. At the end of the day, when you're in that kind of environment, you're just not given the resources and the support that you need. Lack of support can lead to things such as denial, self-hatred, internalized homophobia, which actually, I gotta be honest, I actually think the episode Reverser is actually like one big symbolism, not symbolism, but one big symbol of internalized homophobia. I really wanted to include that into the slideshow, but it's so long already, I never got the chance to like dive into that. So I guess if you ever want to hear more about that, if you ever want to know more about that, feel free to let me know, because I would love to talk about what I think like the Reverser is meant to symbolize or whatever. Anyway, moving on though, lack of resources can lead to confusion, low self-esteem, and, you know, an identity crisis essentially. Nathaniel probably has such a warped idea of what sexuality is and what it means, obviously because of the environment that he grew up in. Marc came into the picture and completely changed everything, probably changed his perception of what being queer is. He also opened up a whole world that Nathaniel didn't even know existed. But we're kind of going to dive into that a little bit later, so hold your horses. But also, his upbringing and his lack of resources isn't the only factor. He's also bi. He's bisexual, which, if you don't know, I'm sure you do, but if you don't, the definition of bisexual is romantically attracted to both men and women, or to more than one gender/sex. So in the corner here, you can see the bi flag, and if you're just listening to this, all you need to know is that the bi flag is pink on the top, blue on the bottom, and then like a pretty thin purple strip. So, a lot of people interpret this as pink is for a girl, blue is for a boy, and then purple is just, you know, both of them. But actually, that's not particularly right. Pink actually just symbolizes same gender attraction. The blue is just opposite gender, and then the purple is just a blend of both. So, the more you know. Now, I know I'm going to get this question, so let's just talk about it. How do we know that? How do we know that he's bi? Well, there are two big clues. First of all, his past romantic interests and his season 6 outfit. So starting off with his past romantic interests, If Illustrator is the first episode that heavily features Nathaniel. First thing established is his crush on Marinette. The episode starts out with Nathaniel drawing himself as a superhero and saving Marinette.
Oh, Super Nathan, you're my hero.
It was nothing.
I love you.
I love you too, Marinette.
Look, Sabrina, it's him as a superhero. And look who he's saving. It's Marinette. He is so totally crushing on you, Marinette.
In fact, his crush on Marinette is literally the whole focus of the episode. It's why he gets akumatized. Like, Chloe found out that he had a crush on Marinette, and he was mad about it, so that's why he got akumatized. And then while he was akumatized, literally his whole mission was just to set up a date with Marinette.
So, I just came by to ask you if, well, it's my birthday today, and, would you want to come to my party? Oh, please, Marinette. It'll just be you and me. But I just want Marinette to love me. Oh, poor Nathaniel. Moving on though, his crush on Marinette isn't really explored further than that. Like, it's only really explored in Eve Illustrator, and then after that it's like nothing. But there is one more crush that is explored, and it's his crush on Ladybug in Reverser. So how do we know he had a crush on her? Well, Nath was drawing pictures of Mighty Illustrator and Ladybug, which was like his own fictional superhero name. Marc saw the drawings on the school website and wrote a story called The Diary of Ladybug. So Marinette reads the story and tries to set up Marc and Nathaniel, because obviously Marc was an author and Nathaniel was an artist. Literally so perfect. So essentially Marinette gives Nathaniel the story and tells him to meet the author in the park later that day. And due to the book's title, Marinette's mysteriousness surrounding the writer, and also just because of the tiny little section that he actually read, Nathaniel believes 3 things. First of all, the book is Ladybug's real diary. 2, he would be meeting Ladybug that day. And 3, Ladybug was also in love with him. Yikes. So when Nathaniel finally makes it to the park and walks up to who he believes is Ladybug, this is his reaction.
Ladybug?
Essentially, the blush tells us everything, which if you're just listening to this, obviously you didn't see that clip, but all you need to know is that he's blushing, like, as he's walking up to Marc. So clearly, if he's blushing because he thinks he's going to be meeting Ladybug, like, he likes her. Now, obviously, the reason why I kind of bring up Marinette and Ladybug is because this clearly tells us that Nathaniel only ever had interest in girls. But now, in The Ruler, it's obvious that he had an interest in Marc, aka he doesn't just like girls. Now, yes, I know that bisexual isn't the only sexuality that is attracted to multiple genders, so why do we say bisexual particularly? Well, that leads me to our second reason, his season 6 outfit. So first of all, it's been headcanon that Nathaniel was bi for so long, but it pretty much became confirmed in season 6 due to Nathaniel's outfit. Which once again, I kind of just need to defend myself here because so many people have argued with me about this. I don't know why. I'm like, oh, Nathaniel's bi and it's confirmed because of an outfit. And people are like, no. First of all, his outfit has nothing to do with his sexuality. Second of all, those aren't even the bi colors. That happened once. I got a comment. We weren't even talking about Nathaniel specifically, but I was just saying that, like, they used Nathaniel's outfit as a way to represent his sexuality, and the person replied saying, that's not the bi colors. What? He literally... That's so off topic, and we'll get into that later, but I was like, that's such a stupid argument. Anyway, moral of the story is, I can confirm that the outfits, and specifically the colors used for the outfits, are strategically chosen to reflect the character's personality, their growth, and in some cases their sexuality. The people who worked on Nathaniel's character design deliberately chose those colors to represent his sexuality in the way that Marc's rainbow shirt has always represented his queerness. So let's take a look, shall we? So right here we just have a bunch of different pictures of Nathaniel's outfit. Once again, I'm so sorry if you're just listening to this, but I'm sure if you've seen The Ruler, you know what his outfit looks like, or if you've just seen season 6, you know what his outfit looks like. And if you don't remember, obviously you can just like Google it and stuff, but here you have it. And obviously one of the biggest like things you'll notice about it is that blue, pink, and purple are everywhere, all over his outfit. He has the classic orange shirt. They just swapped the pants and the jacket for the overalls. They also changed his shoes. And obviously Nathaniel is an artist, so they really went that route with his outfit. Obviously all of the colors on his outfit and his shoes are just like splotches of paint, which obviously just like represents him being an artist. But when you pay close attention to the colors used, you'll notice that the only paint colors are blue, pink, and purple. And as for the shoes, they're purple, and the only paint colors that are used for them or on them is pink and blue. And of course, obviously, there's a bunch of different shades, but still, blue, pink, and purple are the only colors used. Once again, here's another look, more of like the full outfit. You can see all of the colors just right there. Now mind you, they do use other paint splotch colors,
but they're only used on his bag. That was done strategically, y'all. So now that we have that explanation out of the way, let's go back to our original statement. So, just kind of talking about the fact that one of the factors is the fact that he's bi. The reason why I say that, the reason why him being bi is so important is that prior to now, he's only ever been interested in girls. It makes sense that he would have always believed that he was straight. It's like his whole life, he's only ever honed into the part that likes girls. And I mean, he only ever had crushes on girls. So it makes sense that he would have never questioned his sexuality or would have never realized that he was bi prior to meeting Marc and like being friends with Marc. Nick Nilsson is actually my favorite example of this. In my opinion, his character in terms of figuring out his sexuality is exactly like Nathaniel's. So I'm not sure how many of you guys have actually seen Heartstopper or know anything about it. So if you're not familiar about Heartstopper and kind of the story, essentially Nick only ever had crushes on girls. He only ever liked girls growing up. But then he met Charlie and things were flipped upside down. Nick felt drawn to Charlie from the beginning, but he only ever thought of it platonically. Of course, things changed over time, and he began to sense that the feelings that he had were not platonic. Charlie and him end up kissing, and after that he most certainly knows that he's not straight, but then again he was still very conflicted about his sexuality. He didn't know like what his sexuality was. All he knew is that he grew up liking girls and then all of a sudden now he likes Charlie. But by the end of the first season, after so much research, he realized that he is bi and even comes out to some of the people around him. I think that's kind of the same story with Nathaniel. He had only ever liked girls, so the concept of liking boys too was a little hard to grasp. But obviously over time, the more time he spent with Marc, the more he got to explore his feelings for him, eventually leading him to figuring out his sexuality. So it's like in the way that Charlie opened up this whole new world to Nick, Marc opened up this whole new world to Nathaniel. And like I said earlier, with my theorized timeline, the ruler is what shows this happening. So, him figuring out his sexuality happens in the ruler. But before we can get back into my interpretation of the first 5 minutes of the ruler, there's one more key background-esque thing that I wanted to highlight. Representation! Yep, we're talking about the Marcaniel in the representation scene. So we still have no clue what was going on here. It's never been explained like officially. We don't know what they were doing. We don't know what they were talking about. People have their theories about what was going on, and of course I have mine. I always believed that that scene was simply Marc confessing to Nathaniel, and I still do, and even more so after the ruler. I just think the context of the ruler kind of explains what happens in representation. That's just me though. I feel like that scene was a I really like you and it's okay if you don't feel the same, I just needed you to know moment. And I just kind of assumed that Nathaniel just replied with uncertainty. Probably never saw Marc as anything other than a friend, but always felt something more, but just like thought that that thing was platonic. And I feel like that scene kind of like opened his eyes. I think in that moment he was like, wait, maybe I do like you back, but I don't know, I don't blah 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 blah. Like that's how I just envisioned the scene going. So I guess all of that's just to say that I think in the ruler, Nathaniel most certainly knows that Marc likes him, that Marc has an interest in him, that Marc wants to date him. Essentially, there's a few examples of why I theorize that so heavily within the ruler, and we will kind of like be highlighting those things as we go along, like talking about the ruler. Anyway, just wanted to say that. All you need to know is that Nathaniel most certainly knows that Marc likes him, and there's proof of it. Anyway, so now that we have that bit of context out of the way, let's get back to my interpretation. So like I keep saying, the first 5 minutes of the episode is of Nath figuring out / accepting his sexuality. So let's get into all of the proof that we have that this is the case. Throughout the first 5 minutes, Nath is shown being very skeptical of the comic. He knows it's a beautiful story, but he's having a hard time deciding whether it's right or not. He's also still not sure if he even wants to illustrate it. And obviously that's just due to his parents' reaction to the first edition of the comic. So knowing that this comic represents his sexuality shows us that what he's really battling with is his sexuality. So deciding whether or not it's right is him trying to figure out if he's really bi or not, and then not knowing if he wants to illustrate it is being wary of accepting his sexuality, like internally accepting his sexuality. Because there's figuring out your sexuality, accepting it, and then other people accepting it. And it's like just because you know your sexuality doesn't mean you yourself is going to accept it, and maybe if you know it and you do accept it doesn't mean other people are going to accept it, and maybe you know it and you don't accept it and the people around you also don't accept it. You know, there's so many different scenarios. But anyway, moving on.
It's the reveal scene, when they show each other's true faces. I'm just not sure that's what people want to see.
I'm just not sure that's what people want to see. So it's important to remember that Rain Piercer and Sun Heart kiss at the end of the reveal. So when Nath says that about the reveal scene, because mind you, I'm not sure people want to see it, he's specifically talking about the reveal scene. He's specifically saying he believes that people don't want to read about two guys kissing, or just like any queer representation in general, and obviously, once again, that idea came from his parents' reactions. So the reason why that's so important is that it tells us that Nathaniel was struggling with his sexuality, specifically because he was scared that his parents wouldn't accept him, which is most certainly proven by later scenes, which we will get to later.
I know it's a good story, it's just... You don't like it, do you? Of course I like it. Are you sure? I don't want you to do it just to make me happy. Sunheart and Rain Piercer is our story. Mine and yours.
So the whole idea of Nath still trying to like figure out his sexuality and specifically like internally accept his sexuality is kind of solidified based off of this scene right there, or this conversation. So if I were to translate this story into what I think it represents, it would go like this. Nathaniel says, I know it's a good story, it's just, and my translation is, I know being bi is okay, I just, and then Marc says, you don't like it, do you? Translation is, you aren't bi, are you? And then Nathaniel says, of course I like it. Translation, no, of course I am. Marc says, are you sure? I don't want you to do it just to make me happy. Translation, are you sure? I don't want you to be someone you're not just because I like you. Which, side note, the last translated line is actually one of the reasons why I believe that the representation scene is Marc confessing to Nathaniel. The way Marc talks to Nathaniel in this episode really does sound like it's coming from a place of, I like you, but I won't pressure you. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to figure things out. Which in terms of, obviously, like the Marc confessing theory, it totally makes sense. Anyway, moving on.
Ewan is right, and you're the only one who can illustrate it.
Alright, I'll draw it.
The group heavily encourages Nathaniel to illustrate the comic, and he of course agrees, so everyone runs up and hugs him. And I find this kind of important because it's like Nathaniel accepting the comic from Marinette's hands is essentially him just like taking his sexuality and accepting it, which is great, and it's such an improvement. However, it does not last. The acceptance of his own sexuality did not last long. The next Marcaniel scene is of them at the end of the school day. Nathaniel is back to being skeptical of the comic and whether or not he wants to illustrate it.
It's okay if you change your mind, you know, I won't be mad. I won't change anything between us.
Side note, again, it won't change anything between us. This is yet another reason why I think Marc confessed to Nathaniel in representation. To me, what he's saying here is, it's okay if you're not bi and you don't like me back. I won't let my feelings for you get in the way of our friendship. Because like, mind you, right now they're just friends, right? But it's like Marc kind of wanted to be in a relationship with him, so they're kind of like on the fence, kind of in that situationship. And so Nathaniel being like, I don't think I'm bi. He's like, it's fine, like we could still be friends, like it's okay. It's fine to not be that if you're not, like I don't want to pressure you, and like we can still be friends, like I wouldn't let my feelings get in the way. Anyway. Now, if you're listening to this, that scene was probably so confusing because you're just hearing music. Essentially, the scene is just when Nathaniel gives the comic back to Marc and they like walk away like in separate directions. Now, mind you, this happens right after the scene I just showed you where he's like, nothing will change between us. So essentially what's going on is like, Marc is like, it's okay if you're not gay or not bi, like it's fine, we'll still be friends, blah blah blah. And then Nathaniel gives the comic back being like, yes, I am straight, okay? And then they walk off. So it's like Nathaniel's walking that way, he's straight, and then we have gay Marc over here walking away. Anyway, so moral of the story is Nathaniel ultimately decides that he doesn't want to illustrate the comic and he gives it back to Marc, then walks away.
Marc! Wait!
But, all Nathaniel does this episode is go back and forth, which is totally justified, you do you, boo. So, of course, he turns right around and comes back to Marc, and he takes this story home to illustrate. So it's like, prior to this point, he was like very on the fence about the whole comic, but now he's like, yes, let's do this thing. We're doing this thing. I'm doing this thing. Now, believe it or not, this is the last scene within the first 5-minute mark, meaning we have all the context we need, and I can finally explain my reasoning for my interpretation. Which, a lot of the explanation has already been given along the way, but I wanted to kind of sum everything up. So the biggest thing for me, and the reason why I believe in this interpretation, is just Nathaniel's skepticism regarding the comic in general. Knowing the comic represents his sexuality just tells me he wasn't really sure whether he was actually bi or not. And it's like him accepting and illustrating the story was him saying, yes, I am 100% bi. But essentially him just being on the fence about it is like, I don't know if I am bi, I don't know if I want to be bi. And then him actually taking the comic from Marc is like, once again, I am bi. I'm 100% bi, and I'm ready to accept it internally. Because like I said, there's figuring out your sexuality, accepting it internally, and then other people accepting it. So we've got the first 2 check marks, and now it's time for the third. Which brings me to my next point. The rest of the episode is more about him struggling to come out. It's no longer a question of, am I bi, am I not bi, or do I want to accept myself, do I not want to accept myself? It's just him trying to hide his sexuality as a way to appear straight and please his parents. And we'll get into this later on in the video, but at the beginning of the episode, it's more of a, I don't know if this comic is right, whereas the rest of the episode is more so, finishing this comic was a mistake. I have to get rid of any traces of it and pretend like it never existed. I think this gives us a clear indication that he knows who he is the rest of the episode. He just wants to hide it. So to kind of bring back that comparison, him being like, I don't know if the comic is right, it's like, I don't know if being bi is right for me, I don't know if it fits me. And that's why he kind of goes back and forth of giving the comic back and then taking it, giving it and then taking it. And then the rest of the episode is I know I'm bi and I know I accept it, but trying to come out and wanting to come out is not okay. It's a mistake, and I need to hide any traces that I am bi. So there's essentially just huge contrast of him being I don't think I'm bi, and being I am bi, but I need to hide it. And I just really felt the need to kind of emphasize that in terms of this episode, because I feel like it does kind of give a lot of context of the differing behaviors of him within this episode, if that makes sense. Anyway, essentially, in my opinion, the ruler gives us 2 big reasons as to why they aren't dating. 1, he barely figured out his sexuality, which we just went over, and 2, he doesn't live in an accepting environment, so he never actually let himself date a guy, which finally brings us into the second part of this episode. So the second Nathaniel gets home, he begins illustrating the comic. As we analyzed before, this is when Nathaniel is surrounded by bi-colored lights. This is just essentially symbolism of him confidently coming to terms with his sexuality. So he's no longer on the fence about his sexuality. He knows who he is, and he's not afraid of it. So another way to look at it is, without the drawing, a comic is incomplete. Illustrating a comic completes it. So to put that in sexuality terms, an incomplete comic is just him uncertain of his sexuality, and then a completed comic is certainty of sexuality. And I do think that that is kind of a detail that's pretty important for later on in this episode. We'll talk about it a little bit later. So now that Nathaniel has officially illustrated the comic, aka he's come to terms with his sexuality, you see a change in his behavior. He has a newfound confidence, and this can be seen in the next scene.
What's that? Your comic book stuff again?
No, ma'am. It's schoolwork. We have a group assignment due.
Then I'm glad to see you two getting serious.
I don't think your mom will ever like comics. Maybe we should keep this issue to ourselves. I don't want you to get in trouble because of what we do.
So Nathaniel's mom comes into the room, and she gets mad at them for working on a comic. Obviously, she's being very disapproving of what they're doing. Marc notices and lies so that way they won't get in trouble. And then once Nathaniel's mom leaves, Marc suggests not releasing that edition to the public. And obviously that, in sexuality terms, is essentially Marc just telling Nathaniel that he should not come out at all. Because like he said, your mom's never gonna like comics. She's never gonna like gay people. So just don't tell her, essentially is what he's saying. Which, like, a quick little reminder, at this point, Nathaniel has come to terms with his sexuality and Marc knows that. So everything that happens from here on out is strictly about coming out. And I think that's why we kind of see a switch in Marc's behavior, because, like, during the first 5 minutes, he's like, it's okay if you don't want to, like, you don't have to, like, whatever you want to do is okay. We'll kind of talk about this later, but later on in the episode, he's like, no, you're doing the dang thing. So I just feel like the switch in reaction is telling me that there was kind of like a shift in Marc coming to terms with his sexuality. Like, he wasn't sure, and so Marc was like, yeah, okay, whatever, go with the flow. And then at this point, Nathaniel's like, yes, I am bi, 100%, like, no backing down. And so Marc feels more comfortable to be like, you want to be straight? That's BS. Anyway, continuing on, like I said, Marc thinks that Nathaniel shouldn't come out, and Nathaniel heavily disagrees. His newfound confidence is coming in clutch. It's coming in hardcore.
I don't want you to get in trouble because of what we do.
No. You were right when you said this is the best thing you and I have ever made. Everyone's got to see it. Let's print it.
You sure? Are you ready to let everyone see it?
Yes. What we've done is genuine, and when my mom reads it, she'll see how beautiful our story is. Beautiful and important to us.
They're so cute. Okay, anyway, I personally would say that this is like arguably one of the best scenes in the episode, just in my opinion. There's literally so much weight in such a tiny little scene. Plus, like, the hand holding, oh my gosh, it's so cute. It's so cute. As I stated, Marc told Nathaniel that he shouldn't release the comic, but Nathaniel firmly states that no, they absolutely should. It's beautiful and everyone needs to read it and see it. Which, like, obviously this is amazing contrast to the beginning of the episode. Like, when I tell you this man is so confident in his sexuality, I mean it. I mean it. But anyway, so essentially in sexuality terms, Marc says not to come out, and Nathaniel just responds saying that he is ready to come out and he's ready for everyone to know who he truly is. Nathaniel Kurtzberg, what's your true face? Gay! Anyway, I really do want to highlight the part where he talks about his mom, because he was like, my mom's gonna see this and she'll just see how beautiful our story is. And I just really love this because he was so terrified to even accept himself because he was scared that she wouldn't accept him. But now that he's accepted himself, he doesn't care. He was also so convinced that the second he came out, she would be so open and loving, which is so cute, but also it makes the scene of her not accepting him like 10 times more hard and painful. The next bit of the episode is of them printing out the comic, essentially just more symbolism of Nathaniel choosing to come out. But then we get to the most dreaded scene. Nathaniel comes home to his mom, who has just discovered the comic. Now, I know the comic represents Nath's sexuality, but it's important to note that this scene does not represent her figuring out that he is bi. She does not know what his sexuality is in this moment. This is not the finished version. As I stated, the unfinished version is representation of Nath still being on the fence. Remember when I said to keep in mind the whole incomplete, uncertain, complete, certain thing? This is what I mean. When Nathaniel had the incompleted comic, he wasn't sure about his sexuality. He was kind of just on the fence of like, am I straight, am I not straight? It's only the finished version of the comic, so writing and illustrations, that represents his actual sexuality, which is why he destroyed the comics after his mom found the unfinished comic, because he wanted to get rid of any traces of him actually being bi. In my opinion, his mom finding the unfinished comic is just her finding out that he had been toying with the idea of not being straight. So her finding out this is just her finding out that there was a possibility that he wasn't straight. So in order to fully understand this scene, we're going to just take the whole scene bit by bit, really dissecting what each character is saying and meaning.
Care to explain? Were you planning on drawing this?
No.
Did your friend write this story?
Yes.
Now, quick little kind of side note, in this scene specifically, it appears as though the written portion of the comic is representation of Marc's sexuality, and the art is about Nathaniel. So the incomplete is more just talking about Marc's sexuality, and the full comic is more representation of Nathaniel's sexuality. So the were you planning on drawing this is almost like saying, are you gay? Obviously, Nathaniel denies it. His mom then questions Marc, saying, did your friend write this story? AKA saying, is your friend gay? And Nathaniel confirms that he is.
Did your friend write this story?
Yes, that's what you wanted, isn't it? Genuine sentiment?
There's nothing genuine in there.
This bit is pretty straightforward. At the beginning, his dad said the story needed genuine sentiment and implied that the sentiment should be a straight relationship. So her saying there's nothing genuine in there is once again a way of looking down on the queer representation in the story. Obviously, once again, just establishes more of her homophobia.
Is this about the final reveal scene?
Your friend is free to imagine whatever he wants, but you mustn't waste your talent on it.
Is this about the final reveal scene? Nath is asking if the gay kiss at the end of the story is what she's so angry about. Nathaniel's mom replies saying that Marc is free to do whatever he wants, but Nathaniel isn't allowed to waste his talent on it. So, to translate, she's saying, Marc can like and date whoever he wants, but you aren't allowed to be gay. Essentially, she's like, Marc can like boys if he wants, but you can't. You're not allowed to do that. Guys, I'm not homophobic. It's just you can't be gay. Okay, girl, bye.
There are a lot of noble arts. Architecture, industrial design, scenography. You can do anything you want except this. This comic book phase of yours is over. And if you ever disobey me, I'll have no choice but to forbid you from seeing Marc again.
So to translate that, essentially what she's saying is there are a lot of honorable women you could be interested in. You could be with anyone you want, but just not a boy. This gay phase of yours needs to stop, and if you refuse to be straight, I won't hesitate to forbid you from being friends with Marc. Essentially being like, Marc is turning you gay, and if you continue down this gay path, I will stop allowing you to see him, because apparently him not being around gay people is going to mean he's straight. It doesn't work that way, but okay.
What are you going to do?
No one can see this. It was a mistake.
I thought you were happy with the results.
I was wrong.
So in the scene where Marc and Nathaniel are in the bedroom, one of the biggest reasons why he wanted to print the comics is because he believed his mom would be accepting of his sexuality, right? He's like, this is the most beautiful thing we've ever created, and when my mom sees it, she's gonna see that. So that's essentially him being like, when my mom finds out I'm bi, like, she's gonna be so accepting of us. Obviously that did not happen. And of course, at this point in The Ruler, he still hasn't come out to her, but she found out that there was a possibility of him not being straight, and Babes was not having it. She was not having it, let me tell you. And knowing this was her reaction, or this would be her reaction to him coming out to her, he rethought everything, and that's exactly what that scene is. He had this idea that she would be accepting of him, but there was a possibility that he wasn't straight, and she, freaked out over it, meaning that she obviously wouldn't be accepting of him if he actually did come out. So in this part, he's very heartbroken over her reaction, and he freaks out over the printed comics, aka, freaks out over the possibility of people finding out about his real sexuality. So he runs to the school to erase any traces of it. So Nathaniel says, no one can see this, it was a mistake. And essentially what he's saying is, no one can find out about my sexuality. Wanting to come out was a mistake. And then Ziggy replies saying, I thought you were happy with the results, which is essentially saying, I thought you were excited to come out. And then obviously Nathaniel replies saying, I was wrong. So after that, Nathaniel transforms into Caprikid and creates a shredder to get rid of the comics, essentially just trying to hide his sexuality and pretend he's straight. So he quickly remembers that Marinette still has the proofs, so he goes to her asking to get rid of them. Marinette tries to convince him to rethink his decision by stating, comic books are so you. And then Nathaniel replies saying,
I'm only saying that because that's all I've ever done. But if I do something else, I can become someone else.
But that's not how it works.
Honestly, I think that this is one of the more obvious queer-coded lines. Nathaniel saying, if I do something else, I can become something else, is him saying, if I pretend I'm straight, I will eventually become straight. And then Marinette replies with, but that's not how that works. Clock it, sis. Nathaniel then tells Marinette to respect his choice, to which she does. However, she convinces him to let her keep the proofs in case he changes his mind. And I just feel like a reason why he allowed that to happen is because a part of him just couldn't let go. A tiny little part of him wanted to come out, just wanted to be himself, essentially. And honestly, I feel like this scene is probably more symbolic of his feelings of Marc rather than just his sexuality, and that's why he, allowed her to keep the proofs. It was more so, I have feelings for Marc and I want to be with him, and that's why he wanted to keep the proofs, because a part of him still wanted to date Marc, if you know what I mean. Anyway, speaking of Marc, it's time for Nathaniel to let Marc know.
I'm sorry. Nath, I know you. Even if you stop, you'll keep drawing comics in your head.
I won't. Besides, that's my problem. This way, at least, you and I can still be friends.
My friend draws from the heart. He doesn't give up on his passion. My friend doesn't hide who he really is.
I'm sure you'll find another illustrator.
Now, not gonna lie, I genuinely thought that this was like the breakup scene when I first watched this episode, not gonna lie. It honestly just made so much sense in my head. To me, it seemed like Nathaniel was telling Marc that he didn't like him anymore because he was straight, and then Marc saying, "You'll still draw comics in your head," was basically him saying, "You'll still like me / have feelings for me even if you pretend you're straight," and then him being like, "No, I won't," is like, "No, I'm still straight." Obviously, we know that that is not particularly correct. This was not like a breakup scene. So here's what I really think is being said. So Marc is essentially saying what Marinette was saying, just because you pretend doesn't make it go away. Kind of like a good luck babe moment, you know? By good luck babe, I mean Good Luck Babe by Chappell Roan. Anyway, Nathaniel replies saying something along the lines of, "No, you're wrong, it will go away. I can make it go away. And if it doesn't, oh well, that's my problem to deal with. Plus, if I'm straight, then we can still be friends." Marc once again sees right through his BS. He's like, "No, girl. My friend doesn't hide who he really is." Okay, clock it, king. Clock it. See, he's like, "You're bi. I know it. You know it. What are we doing? Why are you saying you're straight? This is crazy." Yeah, Marc's attempts at trying to get Nathaniel to stay does not work. And he doesn't listen. He just walks away. Well, doesn't walk away. He says, "I'm sure you'll find another illustrator." And then he walks away, which him saying that is essentially him just saying, "You'll find another person to fall in love with," which, going back to my whole representation theory, I think this is just more proof that representation, or that the representation scene, was a confession. I just don't think Nathaniel would have said something like that if he wasn't aware of Marc's feelings. Like, why would he be like, "You'll find another person to fall in love with," if he didn't know that Marc was in love with him?
Are you crying because of Nath? I'm sure he'll change his mind when he's ready.
For that to happen, he'd need to change parents too.
Okay, so the next bit of the episode, Marc goes into the shed to cry. Marinette finds him and implies that Nathaniel would accept himself someday. So essentially she's like, "There's no need in crying, like I'm sure he's gonna come around to his sexuality again." Anyway, moving on, Marinette sees Nathaniel's mom and decides it's time to change her mind, which, like, girl, love the confidence, but it's not gonna work. And essentially Marinette just makes it worse. As I stated, his mom didn't know that he was bi. All she saw was the unfinished comic. And like I said, her finding the unfinished comic was essentially her just realizing that Nathaniel was entertaining the idea of not being straight. So this scene in particular is her just finding out that he wasn't just entertaining the idea of not being straight, but that he isn't straight. Like I said, I don't think she knows his sexuality specifically, but she knows for a fact now that he's not straight. He's not just thinking about not being straight, but he isn't straight, if that makes sense.
I won't let you ruin your future. We'll get you straightened out. Believe you me.
We'll get you straightened out. Bro, way to be subtle. Anyway, sorry, that scene is not important at all, but I just thought that part was funny. Also, the other part that's really funny to me, I didn't include this in the slideshow, but when she's akumatized and Marc shows up and she's like, "You're the one who convinced my son to make comics." But like, really, she's saying, "You turned my son gay." It's just funny to me. I don't know. I mean, like, she's not wrong, but it's not like he turned Nathaniel bi, because that's not possible. But like, he is the reason that he knows he's bi, so she's not entirely wrong. It's not my fault you don't like girls. Yes, it is, Michael. It is your fucking fault. If y'all know Stranger Things, and if you know anything about Byler, you probably understand the reference. If you don't, I'm so sorry. That was so random. Anyway, continuing on. After that, Miss Kurtzberg gets akumatized, and her whole thing is making everyone straight. And this is represented by her power making the people she hits stiff and straight. So she like hits you and then your body like becomes straight. It's really funny when you think about it. Anyway, I'm not gonna go too into detail about all of the like metaphors and stuff and all of the gay references, and we're not gonna talk about all of the translations of like everything that's stated in the time period of her being akumatized, because we don't have all day. We still have so many more slides to go, so we gotta wrap this up. But I did actually want to point out the closet scene, which happens during her akumatization.
Are we really about to confront your mother?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm done hiding.
So in this scene, he goes into the closet and says, "I'm done hiding." After he transforms, he comes out of the closet, which is symbolizing him actually coming out of the closet. And just like being ready to come out of the closet as well. He's done conforming to his mother's wishes. He's going to be himself. And if she has a problem with it, if other people have a problem with it, that's on them. That's kind of a you problem, not me. Like, yes, king. Yes, King, we love it. We love it so much. Oh, also, the part where she's like, well, you didn't illustrate it, did you, Nathaniel? And he like looks at her. He's like just shoving it in her face, and I love it. That was so off topic, but anyway, we love that he's finally so comfortable and confident in his sexuality and coming out. Although, can I just say really quickly, this scene does kind of kill me because he literally goes into the closet with bi-colors, right? We talked about it. His outfit is bi-coded, but then he comes out of the closet with the straightest coded superhero suit. Have you seen his superhero suit? It's literally white and black, which is typically correlated to being straight. It's just so funny to me. I don't know. There's a lot of irony there. But actually, really quickly, speaking of his hero suit, I did want to talk about it. And specifically, I wanted to highlight one aspect of it, which is the zipper. Because I do really find the zipper significant to his outfit. There's definitely a lot of symbolism there. So let's talk about it. So this section is called the triangle. So kind of entering the real world. Not that this episode hasn't been talking about like the real world stuff, but anyway, I want to talk about queer history, or just like highlight a little bit of queer history. So during the gay men were marked with an upside down pink triangle as a form of classification and identification, basically just another way to dehumanize prisoners. So right here you can see the blue and white striped shirt, and then in the corner on the left chest area there's the number that they were given, and there's the pink triangle there. I think there's actually a lot of different kinds of triangles that were used to identify different kinds of people, and the pink triangle was used for gay men. In the 1970s, gay rights activists reclaimed the pink triangle as a way to symbolize queer liberation. And then in the 1980s, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, a political group called ACT UP flipped the pink triangle right side up and used it as their logo, along with the words "silence equals death." So once again, essentially just like reclaiming the pink triangle. Anyhow, ever since then, triangles have been used as LGBTQ representation, or like just as a LGBTQ symbol. And we can see this being used a lot in media and TV shows as a way to represent queer people / characters. So moving on, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an example of triangles being used to represent a queer character. So just for a little bit of context, we kind of already talked about Stranger Things in this podcast episode, but essentially the costume designer for Stranger Things season 4 specifically made a video just talking about all the different costumes for the show. And at one point she talks about one of the jackets or like overshirts that the character Robin wears. So this is what she had to say.
The yellow overshirt that she wears for quite a while in this season has like a leaf print, and then we custom printed it. So I added some triangles and some equality symbols to kind of have an Easter egg that there's some LGBTQ plus imagery within her outfit. You know, I felt that was important to help represent her for that.
So obviously right here you can see that she said that they custom printed it and they decided to add triangles as a way to represent her sexuality, which like I said, we've kind of gone through the whole history of the pink triangle and just triangles in general. So anyway, I just think that this makes it very apparent that a lot of people do use triangles as a form of representing queer characters. So anyway, finally going back to Miraculous, if we take a look at Nathaniel's superhero design, you'll see that his zipper handle is a triangle, and actually it always has been. Like, this isn't a change that they added in season 6, it's literally always been a triangle. And I can't say that this was necessarily done intentionally, but it seems likely, you know, with the writers always paying attention to little details like this. I think personally it was done intentionally, but I don't know. And if it was done intentionally, it was definitely put there to throw some kind of queer representation into his hero look, especially because it's so straight coded. They're like, we're gonna give you this really straight outfit, but we're just gonna like sprinkle some gay in there. But also in terms of his hero look prior to season 6, I personally think that the triangle was just kind of used as a hint of him being bi, or at least queer, prior to season 6. So essentially they just added that to just represent his sexuality in a way. Anyway, so not the most important thing in the world, but I did just kind of want to throw in the whole triangle thing and talk about it because I thought it was really interesting. But anyway, moving on to the last bit of the episode.
Whoa, there are some really strong sentiments here, all right, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Now I finally see it. You've really poured your heart into it. I'm sorry, and I love you.
Aww. Can I just say, first of all, the fact that they used The Last Dance as the music for this, y'all got me crying. But anyway, going on with the scene, Nathaniel is out, y'all. Oh my gosh, love this. It's been the journey, but we're finally here. And Nathaniel is finally out. And also the comic is out, so he's basically out to everyone else. Like, oh my gosh, this is so cute. So if you don't already know, the whole scene where they're like reading the comic is his like coming out scene, or his coming out moment, essentially. So if you're curious as to how we know this, well, first of all, I think if you've been following along with the timeline of events in terms of the comic and like Nathaniel's sexuality, it's pretty obvious, but of course, you know me. Of course, we're gonna dive into it and dissect it. So, 2 reminders. The unfinished comic is him not out as bi, but not straight. The finished book is him fully out. And then 2, at the beginning they were talking about real sentiment and implied that the only correct sentiment would be a straight relationship. As I said, when his mom found out about the book, she didn't find out that he was bi, but she found out that there was a possibility that he wasn't straight. So her finally reading the finished book is her finally finding out that he is 100% bi. So to put it in terms of like a timeline, she thought he was straight, and then she finds the unfinished comic, which essentially just tells her that he was entertaining the idea that he wasn't straight. Then she ends up finding out that he did illustrate the book, which meant that she knew that he wasn't straight, but she didn't know his sexuality. Now that she's, read the book, she finally knows that he is bi. Like, everything fully out on the table. And then his dad's comment was, there are some really strong sentiments in here, and I wouldn't change it for the world. So essentially that is just him showing his acceptance of not only the queer representation, but also Nathaniel's sexuality. Lastly, to tie the whole episode analysis back to our original question, why aren't Marc and Nathaniel dating? I wanted to talk about Sunheart and Rainpiercer, specifically the reveal scene. It's pretty apparent that their comic was, in a way, foreshadowing Marc and Nathaniel, or more specifically, their reveal at the end of the episode, right? Like, kind of the whole thing about this comic is the reveal scene, and now obviously we know at the end of the episode they reveal. So it's very apparent that like the reveal in the comic was just foreshadowing the actual reveal. And because of this foreshadowing, I think it's pretty safe to say that the writers are using Rainpiercer and Sunheart as a way to represent the timeline of Marc and Nathaniel's relationship. So let's dive deeper into Sunheart and Rainpiercer. At the beginning of the episode, when his dad reads the first comic, Nathaniel says, but the relationship between Rainpiercer and Sunheart is pretty deep, isn't it? I think this pretty clearly shows us that the first comic was building up their relationship. I think Marc and Nathaniel knew from the beginning that the two boys would end up together, and the first edition built up that tension. But essentially at that point, they were just friends and they were just partners. But there was that little bit of like, they might end up together, In the second edition, they fight the villain and then reveal to each other. It's only after they reveal that they kiss, aka it's only after the reveal that they state their lasting feelings for each other and finally, get together. And also it's important to note that like during the whole time, like prior to the reveal, once again, they were just friends. But at the end of the second edition is when they reveal. After that is when they get together and they kissed. That's definitely the exact same timeline in terms of Marcaniel. They met and became friends in Reverser, and that's all they ever were. Obviously mainly due to the fact that Nathaniel didn't know that he was bi. But obviously there are those little things where it's like, y'all seem a little like y'all are gonna end up together. Like, we all know Marc and Nathaniel's relationship, right? Like, we knew that they were building up their relationship and that they were gonna end up together. Like, it was so apparent, okay? In Representation, Marc confessed to Nathaniel, which I believe like this is when Nathaniel started to actually question his sexuality. But just like with Sunheart and Rainpiercer, nothing could happen until they revealed. Obviously, the reveal scene has always been used as symbolism of Nathaniel coming out as bi. So what I think this is saying is that they couldn't date or wouldn't date until Nathaniel had come out. So it's like as long as Nathaniel was in the closet, they would never be an item. But not only was the reveal symbolism of Nathaniel coming out, it was also meant to foreshadow their actual reveal. I think this just goes to show that they wouldn't be dating until after they had revealed. But not only was the reveal symbolism of Nath coming out, it was also meant to foreshadow their actual reveal. I think this just goes to show that they wouldn't be dating until after they had revealed their secret identities, which they now have. So like I said, essentially the timeline of Sunheart and Rainpiercer is just like a reflection of Marc and Nathaniel. So it's like they're friends, but probably a little bit more, and then they reveal, and then bam, they're dating. I think that's what they're trying to say about Marc and Nathaniel's relationship and kind of the timeline of their relationship. So basically all this is to say that future episodes, possibly the Marc episode, will center around them finally getting together. Yep, we've built up their relationship all we need to, and future episodes is when they're going to be actually dating. So basically if all goes well, Marc and Nathaniel kiss soon. I feel like that's really all that's important about this episode. Like, they're not dating, but I want you guys to know that they will be soon. And the Marc-Annael kiss, guys, it's coming. I'm telling you, it's coming. And you know what? When it does, I'm blowing confetti cannons. We're gonna have a party because I have been waiting too long for this kiss. And I gotta say, if they mess it up, if they screw it up, I'm gonna be pissed, to be honest. You know, if they're gonna pull an Alia and Nino, and if they're gonna pull a Feeligami with Marc-Annael, I might just lose it. And if you don't know what I mean by Alia and Nino and Felix and Kagami, essentially, it's just like they never showed their first kiss. I mean, they know they eventually showed Alia and Nino's first kiss, but like, it was just like this lame ass scene. And it was so far into the show. Why could they have not just shown it in that moment? And, you know, with Felix and Kagami, they completely skipped their first kiss, which like there was so much buildup in terms of Adragami's first kiss, which didn't even happen. There was no first kiss, but there was still a lot of buildup for it. And then we just, like, there was nothing. Like, we never saw their first kiss, and it bugs me. And it has always bugged me. Anyway, so their first kiss better be their first kiss. I really would like to not be disappointed with this kiss. Anyway, that's slightly off topic, but moral of the story is we need it. We need it to happen. Anyway, that kind of brings us towards the end of this episode. So, quick little summary. So, as per usual, things in the show don't always make sense until you really dive into the episodes and everything that they represent. So, I just hope that you guys were at least able to learn a thing or two from this podcast episode. And I hope that if there was any confusion as to why Marc and Nathaniel weren't dating, I hope this kind of clears the air. I hope it kind of gives you like a better idea of the timeline of Marc-Annael in a way. Which brings us to our assignment for the day. So in a paragraph, I want you guys to talk about anything and everything that you learned from this podcast episode. I just want to know, like, were you able to pick up on all of the metaphors within this episode, like prior to seeing this podcast episode? Essentially, when you first watched The Ruler, I want to know if you were able to like pick apart like every tiny little detail about this episode, or did you know only a little bit about it and this podcast episode really opened up this whole world that you didn't even know existed. In this paragraph, I also want you guys to provide at least one of your favorite metaphors and explain why. Like, obviously, we said that this whole episode was a metaphor to homophobia, but there's a lot of like tiny little metaphors. We kind of talked about a lot of them in this podcast episode. So I just want to know what your favorite is. I think I already said this, but my favorite is when she's like, you forced my son to make comic books, but she's really saying, you turned my son gay. It's so funny to me. I don't know why. Anyway, that's my example of that. And of course, as always, if you still have any questions about Marc-Annael, their relationship, or even like the episode The Ruler and all the symbolism and metaphors in it, feel free to include those questions in your response. As always, I'll try to answer as many as I can. And lastly, now I will say this is totally optional, but it's fun. I want you guys to give at least one headcanon that you have about Marc-Annael. Because listen, I see so many Marc-Annael headcanon videos. I eat every single one of them up. I love them so much. I mean, I just love headcanons in general, but Marc-Annael ones are always so cute. I don't know why. Anyway, so I want you to give me one that you have, if you have one. Anyway, that concludes this episode. This was probably one of my all-time favorite episodes. I absolutely love like diving into and analyzing The Ruler. It's so much fun, and I really hope you guys learned a thing or two. Anyway, with all that out of the way, it is time to go. I will hopefully see you guys in my next episode. Class dismissed!